3.3 English poetry in the 16th century. The English poetry of the 16th century has two most significant aspects. One is the introduction and development of a short lyrical poem called sonnet, and the other is Sir Edmund Spenser's contribution to poetry. Different English poets worked on the newly introduced subgenre of poetry called the sonnet and polished its form and content. Spenser produced several poetic works, but his long poem, The Fairy Queen, is perhaps the culmination point of his poetic genius. Moreover, several other poets like Marlowe, Raleigh, and Shakespeare composed remarkable poems which added to the richness of English poetry of the 16th century. The sonnet. One of the most significant additions to English literature, and particularly in the genre of poetry during the 16th century, was the composition of sonnets. A sonnet is a poem consisting of 14 lines. An Italian sonnet is divided into two parts called the octave, which has 8 lines, and the sestet, which consists of the remaining 6 lines. In the octave, the poet states a problem or asks a question and then mentions the solution to the problem or answers the question in the sestet. The English poets Sir Thomas White and Henry Howard, who is also known as the Earl of Surrey, learnt the composition of sonnets from their Italian contemporaries, and especially Francesco Petrarch. अब देखें इसमें ये जो स्पेल ने FRANCESCO लग रहा है ऐसे कि इसे प्रोनाउंस करना है फ्रेंकेस्को, बट नो, जब इसकी प्रोनाउंसिएशन निकाली गई और ये निकला है फ्रेंचेस्को, ये चा की साउंड पता नहीं किधर से ये निकाली है, तो इसे फ्रेंचेस्को बोलना है. And especially Francesco Petrarch, who wrote sonnet sequences. Initially, both White and Surrey translated Petrarch's sonnets, but later they composed their own sonnets. Sir Thomas White was a courtier of King Henry VIII and served as a diplomat in Spain and France. This exposure of the continental Europe enabled him to compose sonnets, and thus he became the pioneer of the art of composing sonnets in English language. One of the White's most well-known sonnet is "Whose list to hunt I know where a hind is." Whose list to hunt I know where a hind is. Who so wants to hunt, I know where is a female deer. ये क्या है? अच्छा. White's sonnets, like Petrarch's, express his love for an inaccessible lady who is already married. In addition to sonnets inspired by Petrarch, White also wrote poems which are livelier and imply a conversational style. For instance, he begins a poem, "My lute awake, perform the last." White's contemporary and follower Surrey further polished the art of composing sonnets. He not only translated sonnets written by Petrarch, but also experimented with the sonnet form and divided it into 4 parts. 3 quatrains of 4 lines. 3 quatrains of 4 lines, followed by a couplet consisting of 2 lines. Later, Sir Edmund Spenser and William Shakespeare used the same arrangement of lines in their sonnets. Surrey also translated a Roman poet Virgil's epic poem Aeneid, and in the translation of Book 2 and Book IV used blank verse or iambic pentameter. A often alternate stressed and unstressed syllables. The blank verse was later employed by the Elizabethan dramatists, including Shakespeare and Marlowe, who made their characters speak lines using this metrical form. Thus, Surrey introduced a new arrangement of lines in a sonnet as well as blank verse to English literature. Moreover, Surrey's original poems, like the Assyrian King, reflect his brilliance as well as his command over the language. So we can say that the first half of 16th century, White and Surrey laid the foundations of the English poetry to come in the later years. Sir Philip Sidney was another significant English poet of 16th century who used Petrarch's sonnets as his model. Petrarch composed a sequence of 317 love sonnets addressing his beloved Laura. Similarly, Sidney wrote 108 sonnets recounting his love for Penelope de Verax, whom he could not marry. One of the most well-known of his sonnets is "With how sad steps, O moon, thou climbest the skies." With how sad steps, O moon, thou climbest the skies. These 108 sonnets and 11 songs were included in Sidney's work titled Astrophel and Stella, which was published in 1591, 5 years after his death. Sidney's sonnets, like the Italian sonnets, are also divided into two parts, octave and sestet. Unlike Sidney, another Elizabethan poet, Sir Edmund Spenser, divided his sonnets into four parts, that is, three quatrains and a couplet. He addressed all 89 sonnets to his beloved and wife Elizabeth Boyle. The collection of his sonnets is titled Amority. The most renowned of Spenser's sonnet is "One day I wrote her name on the strand, seashore." One day I wrote her name on the strand, seashore, like Petrarch, White, Surrey and Sidney. ये लाइन थी अच्छा Like Petrarch, White, Surrey and Sidney, the sonnets Spenser composed capture various moods and experiences of a lover. However, Spenser's beloved in his sonnets is an unmarried woman who ultimately agrees to marry him. Thus, his love and courtship end up with his marriage with his beloved. In this way, Spenser introduces another dimension of love in his sonnets, which is quite unlike the notion of love expressed by other sonnetiers. William Shakespeare also wrote 154 love sonnets and divided each sonnet into four parts. The first 126 sonnets are about a handsome young man and his relations with the speaker of these sonnets, while the remaining 28 sonnets are about a woman who has black eyes and a dark complexion. Thus, Shakespeare's sonnets depicting the love for these mysterious characters reflect the maturity of the art of composition of sonnets by English poets. While sonnets are short, ठीक है ना? While sonnets are short, lyrical poems depicting an experience or capturing a mood or expressing a specific idea, the long poetic forms such as an epic idylls with several subjects at the same time. Beowulf is the first English epic followed by Spenser's Faerie Queene. However, in addition to the Faerie Queene, Spenser wrote a pastoral poem, hymns and sonnets. Then we have Edmund Spenser's poetry. Edmund Spenser poetry क्या है? Edmund Spenser was born and educated in London. He attended Cambridge University and in 1580 began working as a government employee in Ireland. His friend, mentor, and another significant contemporary poet, Sir Walter Raleigh, also worked in Ireland at the same time. Spenser's first poetic work was a pastoral poem titled as The Shepherd's Calendar, and it was published in 1579. It consists of 12 eclogues or pastoral dialogues, each referring to a month in the calendar. The content of a poem depicts the ideal life of shepherds living in the countryside. Spenser's beginning his poetic career with pastoral poetry reflects this popular contemporary practice in Britain as well as continental Europe. In England, Spenser's contemporary Sir Philip Sidney wrote a pastoral romance in prose called Arcadia. Similarly, the French and Italian poets of 16th century was also using pastoral life as an allegory for their literary works. The Shepherd's Calendar opens with the young shepherd boy Colin Cloud's complaint about his unrequited love for a young woman, Rosalind. The cold and unfavorable weather in January is depicted by a description of naked trees and Colin Cloud's feeble sheep. The next eclogue on February is a dialogue between an aged shepherd, Theonot, and a young man, Cuddy. In the eclogue on March, the pleasant spring arrives and the Greek god of love, Cupid, is mentioned as a character hiding in the forest. In the next eclogue on April, Spenser praises the maddening queen, Elizabeth I. The eclogue on May consists of an argument between the characters Piers and Palinode, who represent the Protestant and Catholic churches respectively. Colin Cloud reappears in the eclogue on June, complaining about his failure to impress his beloved, who now favors another young man, Menalcus. In the eclogue on November, Colin Cloud praises Dido, the queen of Carthage, who was betrayed by the Trojan Aeneas. The poem ends with eclogue on December, where Colin Cloud, unwise and witless, recalls the spring and summer season and complains about his failure to compose poetry effectively. The poem shows the skillful handling of the verses as well as poet's religious and political inclination. He praises Queen Elizabeth and favors Protestantism. The central character of the poem, Colin Cloud, reappears in a comparatively shorter poem titled Colin Cloud, Come Home Again. In almost 1,000 lines of this pastoral allegory, published in 1595, Spenser mentions his visit to London in 1591. It is an autobiographical work since it narrates the personal experiences of the poet. Spenser's two wedding hymns, Epithalamion and Prothalamion, ठीक है ना, were composed to celebrate his own marriage with Elizabeth Boyle, and also the weddings of the Elizabeth Somerset and Catherine Somerset, the daughters of Earl of वूस्टर अच्छा वूस्टर अच्छा देखिए इसमें ये इसके जो स्पेल हैं WORCESTER लगता तो इस तरह इसकी से पढ़ना वोर कैस्टर या सिस्टर इस तरह ना। तो इसकी जो प्रोनंसिएशन है वो है वूस्टर वूस्टर, ना आर पढ़ना ना सी पढ़ना ना ई पढ़ना, से ऐसा पढ़ना वूस्टर वूस्टर बनता है। द अर्ल ऑफ वूस्टर। In epithalamian, the speaker narrates the events of the wedding day. On the other hand, in prothalamian, the speaker mentions his observations while walking by the river Thames on a pleasant day. He sees nymphs collecting flowers to make crowns for the two brides. He also sees a pair of swans on the river and refers to the Greek myth about the beautiful woman Leda, who was courted by the king of gods Zeus, who came in the disguise of a swan. The poem contains a refrain, "Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song." A collection of minor poems and translations done by Spencer is titled Complaints, containing some small poems of the world's vanity. However, the most significant of Spencer's work is his epic poem, The Fairy Queen. It was published in 1590 and received a great acclaim. The popularity of the Fairy Queen reflects the fact that the English poets during the 16th century not only translated the works of ancient literary artists but also revived their techniques. In the Middle English literature, the verse form of romance replaced the epic form of poetry, but Spencer, who composed poetry in the 16th century, chose to write an epic narrating several stories of adventures of his characters. Throughout the course of the poem, The Fairy Queen, the characters move in various landscapes of the fairyland, including plains, forests, mountains, caves, islands, seashores, dens, and visit castles and places as well. Spencer's picturesque description of these varying landscapes shows not only his imaginative ability but also his descriptive power to paint a scene with the help of words. Spencer planned to write 12 books of the Fairy Queen but could complete only 6. Each of these books is divided into 12 cantos, and each canto consists of 9 stanzas. In a letter he wrote to Sir Walter Raleigh, he complained that the poem was an allegory and it was composed with a didactic purpose to fashion a gentleman or a noble person. Thus, the central character of each of his books is a personification of a moral virtue. In a book 1 of the Fairy Queen, the Red Cross Knight stands for holiness. In book 2, Sir Gawain represents temperance. In book 3, the female warrior. In book 3, the female warrior, Brito Martus, is the personification of chastity. Similarly, friendship, justice, and courtesy are the abstract ideas Spencer presents in his next 3 books of the Fairy Queen. Thus, Spencer's own intention was to compose a moral allegory with characters representing either virtues or vices of human beings. The greatness of the Fairy Queen owes to its polished verse as well as its rich content. The poem can be read and enjoyed as a narrative about the adventures of brave and bold knights who encountered monsters and are tempted by fairies. But at the same time, it is an allegory which can be interpreted at moral, religious, and political levels. Spencer characterizes the corruption of the Catholic Church and admires the Protestant Church of England. The Fairy Queen's character is central to the whole scheme of the poem, and she is in fact represents Queen Elizabeth I. The poem shows Spencer's skill in combining a variety of tones by means of several types of poetic expressions. He uses pastoral, mythical, religious, chivalric, and even colloquial elements in this poem. At times, he uses satire to criticize the practices of the contemporary Catholic Church. He even brings in a philosophical debate in Book 6, where the characters of mutability and nature argue about the principles of change and order and alteration, and decay. Another achievement of the Fairy Queen is its nationalistic nature. It is an English poem representing its creator's sense of pride for his country, which is reflected in the praise for the Queen of England. Thus, Edmund Spenser's poetry reflects the true spirit of the Renaissance with its references to the Greek and Roman sources of knowledge displayed in the content as well as the forms of his works, whether eclogues or an epic. It also depicts the growing sense of patriotism of the English people and the increasing popularity of the newly emerged sect of Protestantism. These elements are also visible in the poetry of his contemporary Elizabethan poets. Other Elizabethan poets: Christopher Marlowe is more known for his plays, but he was also an accomplished poet. He translated the Roman poet Ovid's poem Hero and Leander, as well as Ovid's elegies into English. Marlowe thus set the trend of translating and adapting ancient love stories into English language, and consequently, different contemporary poets produced similar works. He also wrote a short pastoral poem, The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. The poem is also known for its first line, Come live with me and be my love. Come live with me and be my love. Okay. Several replies have been written in response to Marlowe's shepherd's offer, but the most popular is the one written by Sir Walter Raleigh, titled The Nymph's Reply to the Shepherd. Sir Walter Raleigh was a man of diverse talents. He was an explorer and traveler to North America, where he established an English colony in the state of Virginia and grew the crop of tobacco. He served the English government in Ireland for several years. As a poet, he composed sonnets but was more known for his other poems. His 30 surviving poems include Ocean of Cynthia, which expresses his love for Queen Elizabeth. However, his most eminent poem is The Lie, in which he uses the refrain, Go and give the world a lie. In another short poem, What is Our Life?, a play of passion, Raleigh uses the analogy of the stage play for human life. Following the popular trend of using ancient stories in English poetry, William Shakespeare composed the narrative poems such as Venus and Adonis, The Rape of Lucrece. अच्छा, ये मुख्तलिफ किस्म की इसकी प्रोनाउंसिएशन है. ये कोई इसे लुक्रेसी बोलता है, लुक्रेसी बोलता है, कोई इसे लुक्रीची बोलता है. इट डिपेंड्स कि आप इसे क्या पढ़ना चाहें, आपको जो अच्छा लगे. The Rape of Lucrece, A Lover's Complaint, and The Phoenix and the Turtle. The common theme of these poems is love and its expression, whether in the form of sexual advances of Venus or the sexual assault of Lucrece committed by Tarquin, or the death of the lovers, the phoenix and the turtle. In addition to these poems, Shakespeare used songs in his plays. For instance, in his play The Tempest, the character Ariel sings songs like Full fathoms, 5 thy father lies, and where the bees suck, there suck I. I again repeated. Full fathoms, 5 thy father lies, and where the bees suck, there suck I. These songs contribute to the development of the plot and serve as a commentary on the situation. In addition to these renowned literary artists, some other lesser known poets also produced significant poems. For instance, Thomas Campion not only composed songs but also accompanying music. One of his eminent songs is Rose Cheeked Laura Come. Similarly, Chittiok Tichborne. ये इस चिडियाक किसे बोलेंगे, ठीक है, चिडियाक टिचबॉर्न produced some poetry in the short span of 24 years of his life, but is remembered for an elegy he probably wrote on the eve of his execution when he was about to be beheaded for treason against Queen Elizabeth I. The poem opens with a Hamlet, lament. The poem opens with a lament. The prime of my youth is but a frost of cares. The prime of my youth is but a frost of cares. This elegy consists of 18 lines divided into 3 stanzas. Each line of the poem consists of 10 words which are all monosyllabic. Tichborne uses antitheses or contrasting situations throughout the poem. For instance, my feast of joy is but a dish of pain. My feast of joy is but a dish of pain. यही है ना? And my youth is spent and yet I am not old. And my youth is spent and yet I am not old. मज़े का है. Tichborne uses antitheses or contrasting situations throughout the poem. For instance, my feast of joy is but a dish of pain, and my youth is spent, and yet I am not old. The antithesis is most significantly visible in the refrain of the poem. And now I live, and now my life is done. And now I live, and now my life is done. The same technique of presenting contrasting situations is employed by George Peele in his song titled A Farewell to Arms, where he places youth and old age side by side. My golden locks time hath to silver turned. My golden locks time hath to silver turned. In another poem, Bathsheba's song appeal and monosyllabic words and paradoxes like cool fire, the poem begins. Hot sun, cool fire tempered with sweat air. Hot sun, cool fire. Hot sun, cool fire tempered with sweet air. This poem is in fact a song Peele used in his play titled The Love of King David and Fair Bath Sheba. George Peele is one of the university wits and more known for his plays. The other university wits were also significant dramatists and contributed to the development of English drama during the 16th century and especially during the reign of Elizabeth I.